Welcome to the Music History Project. We're your hosts. I'm Elizabeth Dale.
And Dan Del Fiorentino.
And Mike Mullins.
If you want to check out any of our content or any of the other interviews that aren't featured, please check out our website at www.nam.org/library. Welcome back to another episode. I am one of your hosts, Elizabeth, and I'm here with my good friends.
Hey, it's Dan.
And Mike.
We're happy to be here.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. We are coming to you, not so live, from Carlsbad's NAMM offices. And today we're going to talk about Les Paul, the man, the myth, the legend.
What an incredible giant in the music products industry, in addition to being a well-sought-after musician, popular guitarist, inventor, record producer, all-around swell guy. We had two opportunities to interview him, and so I'm so glad that we'll be playing our interviews, both of them, today.
Yeah, and he's actually also the namesake behind the major award at the Tech Awards given each year at the NAMM show in Anaheim.
So this is an extra special edition of our podcast. We're going to run the full interview and make comments throughout.
Yeah, so one of the interviews, the first one we're going to be listening to today, was part of the oral history program, which Dan kind of spearheads there. And if you are unfamiliar, the oral history program is a collection of video and audio interviews that are listed on our website, and there's over 3,000 of them, and they're constantly growing. And if you want to check out today's interview with Les Paul or any one of those other 3,000, you can find them on our website at www.nam.org. That's NAMM.org. And the second clip we're going to listen to is a real treat because it's a radio interview.
Blast from the past.
But yeah, with our own Dan D.
Luckily, my voice had changed by this time, so...
Yeah, you can tell a little bit of a difference, but not much. How old were you?
I think I was actually 20 then, so I was old.
Just a little whippersnapper.
Yes. They teased me because my first interview was conducted when I was 14, and my voice was not quite the same as it is now. So
we've heard that's very mythological stuff around here. I've yet to hear it. I don't know if you have, Mike.
I haven't. I've looked for it too.
It's coming. I know it's coming. One of the things about Les Paul and why it's so special to us here at NAMM to have interviews with him is the oral history program first started in the year 2000 with the idea of capturing and preserving the history of the music products industry with a real focus on those folks who don't normally get interviewed so that we can capture and preserve those stories, like music retailers and music manufacturers, the folks who came up with musical instruments, engineers and designers, luthiers, and so on. And, of course, the folks that sold them in the mom-and-pop shops and the big box stores all around the world. Well, with Les Paul, it gave us an opportunity to tie all of those elements together with a musician and allow us to sort of have a full circle experience, talking with Ted McCarthy, for example, who helped sign Les to the Gibson Guitar Company, talking with music retailers that sold those instruments, the Les Paul guitar, and then actually now being able to talk to Mr. Paul himself. So that full circle has actually grown since that one first interview with Les, and we've interviewed many other musicians that are tied to the music products industry. Steve Vai comes to mind and others, and I think that's really a very exciting and important element of our collection, and I really want to tip my hat to Les for that.
All right, let's go back to November 13th, 2001, when Dan sat down with Les.
Well, to be a music maker, what does it mean to me? It's my whole life. From the time I started out, there was no plan, there was nothing by my family, there was no known reason that I should be drawn to music or to being involved in electronics. It just seemed to be that's the way it was. It was just no problem at all. At 5, 6 years old, I was a rotten little kid, just the way I picture it. Just not happy to throw the switch, but to know what's happening when you do throw a switch. And so I can only compare myself to someone like my brother, and my brother would say, well, you like you're told, you throw the switch and the light goes on. I wanted to know why. And of course that applied to the phonograph record. And if you people remember what a phonograph record is, phonograph record, when Mother played a record, I noticed that if you put your hand on it and slow it down, that the pitch lowered with it. The person's voice, it was normal, would go down lower and lower and slower and slower. And then Mother had a player piano, and I used to pump that thing for her, and I noticed that no matter how slow that you played the piano or how fast you played the piano, the pitch didn't change. So I go to the grade school. This is somewhere between kindergarten and sixth grade. I go with Miss Ross, the teacher, and she doesn't know the answers to these questions exactly. So she says, well, why don't we go to the science teacher of the high school? And they ended up taking me to the library. And I was already learning analog and digital. And this was very fascinating over the period of years, because at that time, I'd stared a ditch digger out of a harmonica. And he just said to me, you know, it seems like you want this more than I do. I thought he was going to hand me the sandwich, but he handed me his harmonica. And my mother's standing right there. She says, no, Lester, you don't play that until we boil it. And in boiling the harmonica, I found that by doing that, you had to play the blues much easier. And I started playing, boiling my harmonica and playing the blues for two reasons. One is I could bend the note better, and the other one is that I wouldn't be eating his sandwich. The funny part about that thing is that I'm tempted to boil some of my guitars. But anyway, this is the beginning of the music business for me, was right in my living room. And my mother says, boy, it's too bad that you don't know just how good you are, what you're doing. I said, well, I don't know what I'm doing. And then it dawned on me that, well, if Edison can put it on a record, maybe that's what I should do. And so I proceed to make my own recording machinery so that I can record. Well, my mother at that time bought a radio. And this, of course, was another missing link in the chain, to have a player piano, to have a Victrola, to have a telephone, to have a guitar and a harmonica, to have all these things in the living room with a radio, speaker. So the telephone became my microphone, and instead of speaking into it, which I also did, I sang into it and played the harmonica. So I run the telephone into the radio, and then they could hear me louder. Everybody could hear me louder. In fact, I'm sure they're glad to this day that I left. but I was the loudest thing in Waukesha. And in doing that, I says, well, I got it this far. Now I've got to get it onto that record. And so my father owned a garage, and with the help of my dad and the mechanic, Hooks the mechanic, I said, I need to have a turntable to put the record on that's very sturdy, that's well balanced. And so old Hooks said to me, well, why don't you go out in the alley and just do a hysterectomy on one of the cars in the alley? They got $25 in those days to get rid of a car. So if my dad took in an old hunk of junk, what they do is you take a sledgehammer, break the head in on it, and turn it into the state, and then the cars, they drag it off and demolish it, get it off the road. Well, it was a perfect flywheel for me, and my first real recording machine that I'm quite proud of is made of dental belts and Cadillac flywheels. So that was pretty interesting.
It's hard to imagine being so young and essentially inventing all those things. First, kind of like the first loudspeaker. I mean, hooking a telephone up to a radio to project his playing and his voice and everything.
Yeah, just thinking to do all of that is pretty incredible.
Absolutely. And what's interesting also is the timing. Like he was saying, well, Edison could do this. Why can't I? It's new. It's different. It didn't seem like it took a whole lot of extra resources. And I love that story about Hooks the mechanic. I thought that was a very insightful story that he tells. And every once in a while, even though maybe some of his stories are a bit drawn out, it's really very, very insightful to me to hear what his thought process was and what the materials and resources that he had available to him that he utilized to the fullest.
Right. So he essentially, to create the first recording device to be able to put stuff on a record, he chopped up a Cadillac into pieces and somehow Frankensteined this recording device together. That's amazing. I mean, it makes me feel like, what have I accomplished in my life? So nothing.
Right. I mean, it makes you look at everything differently. If he's looking at, a car and a telephone and these everyday items, nobody really thinks about making a recording device or anything like that out of them. So it makes you think about other things differently, for sure.
So would you call him like the quote unquote father of those pieces? Like, does he get credit for that stuff or in the music industry, or does he kind of fall by the wayside because it was really primitive in retrospect?
That's a very good question. I think that because there were people like Edison and others that had laboratories and sort of official equipment that were doing the same things on a commercial scale, these recording devices that he came up with in the early part of his career really are overlooked as far as contributions. But they lead to the 8-track that we'll be talking about, the multi-track recordings, and we will be talking a little bit about that later on. And I think that those definitely are credits that he is given, the multi-track and the overdubbing and all of those processes that people really weren't doing at the time that he was. But these early devices that he's talking about now and utilizing the Cadillac and the telephone, it's things that other people were doing in other companies, but with real equipment. And so it's telling to me that he was sort of doing this on the side. Nobody knew he was doing it. He wasn't famous for doing it. He was just a kid. And yet it leads to a plethora of innovations and developments. How'd you like the way I worked in the word plethora?
I was waiting for goodies to come in. Personally.
That will come in later.
I know. That's my goal. My goal is to make sure goodies get said at least once.
I think we just need a new word for each episode of the podcast.
Word of the day.
Yeah.
That's not a bad idea. Should it be goodies or plethora for this one?
I vote plethora.
What's our next segment of Les Paul?
Up until that time, I had the normal diseases and the normal little setbacks that you have, which also kind of comes into my life, and I thought about this many, many, many times, and that is that I don't know, I had the mumps or I had something, and I'm laying there in the living room, and there's a train track across the street. And the interesting thing about it was the fact that that train would be switching cars and slowing to a stop and chugging away to get started. And there were some very interesting things that happened. That while I was lying there, not feeling well, I observed that when the train began to move and chug, it created a frequency that rattled the bay window where I was lying and looking out of. And when it reached a certain frequency, the train moved the window until it shook. So I'm going right back to my teacher again and asked my teacher why. But it was terribly interesting that I should notice this phenomena that was taking place between that train across the street and my bay window, and why the two of them seemed to lock up to each other just at a certain time, a certain frequency, and something that related to the pitch. And when I heard that pitch, and when I says, uh-oh, that window is going to start to do that thing. Well, I told my brother. My brother says, he's nuttier than ever, you know. So my brother thought I was a village idiot for sure in that town, with the switches, with the telephones, with everything I was doing. And even if I was sick laying there in bed, I was analyzing something. Which brings up a little tangent that might interest you. And it's sort of a thread that goes through my entire life. I'm 86 years old, and these 86 years, all is not just where you walk on the stage and kill them, or you go make a recording and it's a hit. It takes a lot of hard work, a lot of perseverance, and you've got to have the determination to want to do these things. And some of these things seem almost beyond our reach. And somehow you have to be able to say, I know I can do it. And yet, when you set your goal, you don't want to set it too high, because of an example would be is that when I was a kid, I rigged up I had a dachshund dog, a little dog called him Buster, and I hooked him up to a box. I put some wheels on it, and I got a long fish pole, and I hung a wiener on the end of the fish pole. So when I wanted to go somewhere, I got in my limo, and I just reeled out that dog for my dog. And so that little hot dog that hung out on that wiener, that hung out on the end of my fish pole, my dog had chased the hell out of that thing, and I had dog power, and I was on my way.
Was it enough to actually carry you?
It was enough to carry me, and my mother just thought that was the greatest thing, and she would just laugh and laugh and laugh because of the creativity that I had of getting around town with my little red wagon.
So
Now, the reason for the story about this little dog is that it's great to have the fish pole and to have the wiener hanging on the end of this thing and creating such a wonderful way of travel, and how interesting it was that it worked. As long as you rewarded the dog and he didn't chase this thing and give up, because he'll just say, finally, there's no use chasing that thing because I never get it. So once in a while, I would see that he was rewarded for this wonderful feat we had going. Well, I think that applies to us. And from being a kid, a curious kid, to learn these things and everything, I would set goals. I would say, well, I know someday that I too will be on the radio, or I too will be on the stage, or I too will be able to play with Coleman Hawkins or Louis Armstrong or one of those people. And lo and behold, I did. I ended up playing not only with them, but playing with others besides him, higher, more of the wishes that come along with when you win one, there's another one next to you, and you go higher and higher and higher. And of course, there's nothing that you get without paying for it also. And so with all the good fortune you have some misfortunes. And I had a terrific accident in 1948, and it was right at the time that I had created the multiple track recording. And I was very excited about this whole concept of taking one voice and making it into a glee club, and one guitar and putting it into an orchestra. And to do all these things which no one else has done, to invent echo, delay, phasing, a bass guitar, an electric guitar. All these things that came about came to a standstill in 1948 when I tipped a car over in Oklahoma. And I'm lying in the hospital, and I don't know how long it's going to take to get well, but it ended up taking 2 years. And 2 years in the hospital, everybody, or many of my friends, people that would advise me or talk to me, oh, you're going to be okay, this, that. And, well, you may never be able to play again because I will never have the use of this arm. There was so many negative things. So when I was lying there in the hospital, what I thought of is what a wonderful, great thing this is, that I have this time to slow down, to actually stop, and think about all the things that I've done, all the things that I'm hoping to do, all the things I haven't done, and where I would like to go. I can reload my gun, go in and hold up another bank. But how was I going to do this? Well, I read. So I read a lot of books in psychiatry with Jung, Adler, Freud. Read a lot of books on electronics. Studied while the other person in the bed, I guess he was just over there groaning and complaining about not getting well. I says, this has got a good side to it, too. And, no, I wasn't strange. I don't think I was strange. My brother would have said he's nuttier than ever. But what I thought, as long as I'm hung up with this thing, what I will do is I'll write songs, and so write music. And so all the things that I wouldn't have done had I not been stopped, not dead, but stopped in my tracks, I wouldn't have done them if it hadn't been for the automobile accident. And so in that year and a half, I conceived all kinds of things. I solved so many of my problems that I had, but I didn't know what to do about them because I was too busy moving. I was too busy with the wiener and the fishpole and the dog, and by the way, that whole limo went to hell one day when my dog saw a cat. Cat went up the tree, and so did my limo. And I brought the thing home. I brought the thing home with the wheels and the dog and the fishbowl. Mother says, what happened? Hadn't counted on it. So things don't go always the way you think they're going to go. Back to the story. We had a couple of years to think things over and rearrange, and I had to go back and learn to play all over again.
Les Paul was 33 when that car accident happened, and I tried to do some research in preparation for this recording to kind of get a little bit more knowledgeable about it, because as we're going to hear later when we go back to Les, it was devastating, and it really altered the course of his life. And so I thought it would be interesting for our listeners to kind of get the nitty gritty and a little bit more details. But surprisingly there's very little information out there about the accident, and what I could find doesn't necessarily come from reliable resources. Not saying that it's not true information, it's just you can't verify it, and I would hate to go out there and talk about things that maybe aren't true because this guy on this music forum posted it and everything like that. But I did find one article that gives a little bit of detail that talks about the accident happened on Route 66 near Davenport, Oklahoma in 1948, which would make, as we said earlier, which would make Les approximately 33. And he was transported to the Oklahoma City's Wesley Hospital, where he says he was in recovery for about 2 years. This article says it was almost a year or so, but I would tend to err on his story, not so much this one. And one of the things in this article that I found interesting is that at first, doctors had told Les that he would probably have to have one of his arms amputated.
Oh, wow.
Initially, which is crazy. I mean, think about if he was down an arm. I don't think that he would have let that stop him in some aspects, but
it would have been hard to do a lot of what he did.
Yeah,
for sure. Drastically
more different products would have come out from him, I think.
One of the stories that circulated for a long time was that one of the doctors knew Les was a guitar player and did extra measures than maybe he would have normally have done to keep Les's arm. I don't know if that's true or not, but that was certainly one of the rumors.
Right. He brings that up in our next clip as well, that doctor, when they were talking about treatment courses, the doctor said, well, he plays guitar, in their little meetings, and that prevented them from doing the amputation.
But one thing is very clear, and he pointed that out earlier, and I think it's worth repeating. This was really a very important sort of critical time in his life. It gave him a chance to, and I love the way he said it, stop. He just stopped. And he, of course, had to relearn things, but he also just stopped. And he reevaluated what was important to him, what were some of the goals that he had, what were some of the mysteries that he still wanted to solve. especially those regarding recording and sound. And who knows what would have happened if his playing career just continued without that opportunity to stop.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like he got very introspective, kind of when you have that brush with death, they talk about, a lot of people say that when that happens, you kind of get your life in perspective. And as you mentioned, reevaluate your dreams and your desires and your needs. And it sounds like he definitely did that, the epitome of that thought process. So let's hear more from Les, and we're going to hear about the aftermath of the car accident and his injuries and the extent and everything like that.
Tell us a little bit about exactly what happened. Your arm was severely injured. Is that correct? And they actually had to put some pins?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, the arm, everything was coming along pretty good. They were going to put me back to normal, except this right arm was so badly injured that they were going to amputate the arm. And so the two doctors were fighting in the hallway, and I could hear them arguing. One says it comes off, the other one says no, he's not. He's not driving a hayrack. This guy is a guitarist, and it's important to save whatever we can. And with all this arguing going on and everything, it got to a point where the two doctors came to me and says, well, what are we going to do? You have to make a decision. I said, I made a decision long before you guys got into an argument. I'm going to keep my arm, and I want to go back and play somehow. And so in the case of my arm, they saved the arm with no movement. They put 7 pins in their screws. And the doc that did it, I'll never forget the second operation when they opened this arm up and looked at it. They said, you wouldn't believe, the doc's at the end of the bed, and he says to me, Les, you wouldn't believe what happened. He says, we get you all opened up and everything, and we look in there, and you got 7 screws that we have to replace. But he says there were a Phillips head, so we had to send a kid out to the hardware store and get a Phillips head screwdriver. And he says, so you had a rest period there. That was just one of the many. And one of the many. I've had more setbacks probably than most people, and still be around to talk about them. It just seems like I've been plagued with one thing after the other. Fella come up to say hi to me, and he cuffs this ear, he knocks out that eardrum. 4 years later, a guy comes up behind me, and he says, hi, Les, and he happens to cuff the ear the wrong way, blows his eardrum out. And there's a total of 4 operations on my ears, so I haven't been able to hear anything. Of course, sometimes it comes in handy if you're with your girlfriend or something, and you just don't want to hear the chatter that's going on. At least I can turn it off.
Or you're playing with a bad musician, right?
Bad musicians, yeah. Well, then I turn it off when I play. Yeah, so...
And yet you keep going. I think that the most encouraging thing about these stories is that Les Paul picks himself up and just keeps going. I mean, this optimism that you are modest about, and sitting in this hospital room for a very long period of time, most people, I think, would start defeating themselves with their own thoughts. And you really picked your chin up quite high and started a whole new list of goals and objectives that you wanted to obtain. How do you explain that? I mean, does that come from your parents? Where did that optimism come from?
I don't know where this drive, this perseverance comes from, this determination that you're not going to give up. I guess all of us, none of us, no matter how much we believe, are in a hurry to leave, and so we fight on. And in many of my cases where it looked pretty drear, what I found is that when you hit these lows and things aren't going so good, you're just that much more determined to do it. Now, why? Well, one, I found out with my heart surgery that when I went in and had this heart surgery done, I happened to be one of the very fortunate persons that with this bypass surgery that it couldn't be done. And so by going to the Mayo Clinic, by going to the New York Columbia Presbyterian St. Luke's Hospital, 3 or 4 of the very large hospitals, and talking with their fine surgeons and doctors, they voted not that it was too risky an operation to do on me. This was in 1980. And so I had a friend of mine, and I'd heard of a doctor in Cleveland, Ohio. And we hunted this doctor, my friend did, hunted this doctor up, and he also turned me down. And I said, did you tell him that who I was or anything? He says, no, I used your right name, Lester Pulvis. And showed him the angiogram. And I said, well, why don't we do what we always do? We usually say, well, I'm Les Paul. And the guy say, the Les Paul? And it works wonders. and someone out there seems to somehow either cash my check or get me out of a ticket for double parking or something. And so what happened in this case is that my friend Ralph took my angiogram to the Cleveland Clinic, and it happened. The doctor says, the guitar player, the Les Paul, the guitar player, he says, well, have him come in. So the doctor called me and says, well, how soon can you get here? This is on a Wednesday. I said, I'll be there Thursday. And Thursday, I was at the Cleveland Clinic. And for 10 days, I waited. And he called me in the room, and he said, Les, and I had maybe 5, 6 of my friends with me there, and we listened to an interesting proposal. He says, I want to try something new. I want to bring the mammary artery down, and I want to give you instant blood. And he's saying that he doesn't know why no one else thought of this thing, but would I be willing to do it? And I said, well, what are the chances? And I thought they were going to say they were worse. He said, no, they're the same. And I said, well, why don't we go do it? He says, great. And we did the operation. When the doctor finished the operation, he says, well, it turned out okay, and I'm going on a good drunk. So the doc, 14 days later, he's going to say goodbye. The operation was a success. And of course, today, nobody has this operation. Almost everybody has the operation, has what I have. And I'm very proud to say that I had something to do with that. And all I had to do is say yes, and lucky to have a great creative doctor to be able to do what he did. And that's 23 years ago. And he called me in his office 14 days when I'm to leave. And he says, Les, I want to ask you 2 questions. I'm going to ask 2 favors from you. One, that you'll be my friend, and the other one, that you'll work hard. Gee, I said, Doc, I thought that's what got me in here. No. He says, hard work never hurt anybody. He says, in fact, it'll probably do more to keep you going. And I think so many times of how right he was. And that is, well, first of all, I think of the other guys that were in the room with me. They're all gone. And I'm still going. But the thing that interests me most is the fact that I have a reason to get up in the morning, to get up and go to work. I've got something to do. Again, I'm with that dog with a wiener. I have something to go for. And I just keep that wiener just out of reach far enough so that I almost can get it. And every once in a while, I'll hit a winner. Now, I come plagued with arthritis in 1961. And these hands, I have no movement in these hands at all. So I have to play the guitar with no fingers. See, so I can bend them from here where they join the hands, but no movement in the fingers. See, they're solid. So I had to learn to play the guitar all over again and say, now how am I going to play the guitar with no moving fingers?
So that last part where Les is talking about when his arthritis has set in and he has to kind of relearn to play the guitar, since we don't have the visual, what he's talking about is the joints, the knuckle joints that are closest to your palm, essentially, those are still fully functional, but the middle knuckle, the smaller one halfway down the finger, he cannot move that joint at all, and so he has no dexterity in each of his fingers, which makes it very difficult to play an instrument, and especially the guitar, and he has to relearn the entire process, which I think is amazing because he probably had to relearn it after the car accident too, with all the pins in his arm. Had to kind of start from scratch there, and then he has his heart surgery, and there's a chance that he might not get to play after that, and he overcomes all these medical obstacles throughout his life.
I remember reading an article interview with Les in Guitar World magazine in the 70s, in which the author compared Les's accident and his ability to relearn the guitar to that of Django Reinhardt, whose fingers were badly burned, and he played with only a couple of fingers on one hand and became, of course, a jazz guitar legend. And Les's response to that was complete embarrassment that he would be compared to the great Django Reinhardt. And I think that's very funny because he showed the exact ability to reinvent himself and to still play even with this limitation. And, of course, many people have tried to emulate both those gentlemen with fully functioning hands and having a difficult time doing so.
Yeah, I mean, I think relearning anything is pretty difficult, but having to relearn how to play twice, probably because of both incidents, it's just...
You really talk about mental fortitude. I mean, it's not just the physical aspect of relearning how to use your hands or your arm in a different way because your function isn't restored to where it used to be, but getting over that mental block of having to do it all. I mean, I don't think many people are as tough mentally to do it once, let alone twice.
Yeah, and it just kind of, it shows you that, he was so driven that he did that. You know, he really got up the strength to relearn all of that stuff. And it's funny because, you know, obviously the accidents were horrible things that we wish didn't happen, but because of them, it kind of pushed him in this direction to be more focused. And you wonder what would happen if he wasn't in those accidents. Would he still be driven to do all this and go farther, or would he not have accomplished as much because he wasn't pushed from the accidents?
Yeah, and Les definitely seems like a guy who thrives on challenge.
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
he's got an engineer's brain in my perspective, and he sees a problem in front of him and he wants to find a solution. So I don't think giving up, whether it's giving up relearning to play or giving up inventing a new gizmo or gadget, I don't think he'd do it. I think he just sees it as another obstacle to overcome. So,
well, he was certainly driven to prove to himself that he could be a guitar player again. And I think in doing so, he became a better guitar player. You know, a lot of times because of those multi-track recordings, let's say Lover or Brazil or some of those big hits that he played really, really fast, a lot of us want to say, well, it's the electronic sleight of hand that made it faster. And of course, we know he split it up and so on and so forth. But even if you slow it down, he didn't make any mistakes. And having a limitation of his hand is quite remarkable no matter what the speed was. But in later years, of course, he was asked to do those same recordings live, and he was able to do it very, very fast. So I believe that he was committed to himself to be even better than he was before, and I think he proved that he could be.
All right, so let's hear the last bit of the conclusion of our oral history from 2001 with Les Paul.
So I says, well, one thing, I'm going to have to become accustomed to one note instead of 10. Because where I could play 10 notes, now I can only play one note. But if you're going to play dum-dum or dum-dum, da-dum, you can play it many different ways. Just a note or two. So with that thought in mind, I said, well, I'm going to learn to play the guitar all over again with this. This is a real tough disease, is to have arthritis. The point that was good about the arthritis is that, believe it or not, the arthritis gives up. And when it can't do any more damage, it stops. And when I figured out that if I can let this thing go until it can't go any farther, okay, so I kept working with medications and with exercises and everything to try not to heal the finger, but get the finger so that it would be so crippled that it wouldn't move at all. If it didn't move at all and it didn't hurt, I could go back and play. And now what are you going to do, and play with a couple of movements of your hand, and what can you do with it? And that's the challenge. And I've had more fun with the problems that I've had with this arthritis over anything I've had. And you say, well, why? Why are you doing it? And I says, well, I asked my friend what he's going to do, and he says, I don't know, I'm going to get up and I guess work around the house and do something. He has really no goal. And I have a goal, and that goal is that I'm going to end up and I want to play as good as I played before, only with no hands. And it's a kind of an interesting way of tricking your head into carrying on. Then you do the same thing in writing articles or doing just what I'm doing now, and that is to help somebody for many reasons. It may not be because he's not feeling well. It may be that he's just been floating around and hadn't made a decision on what he'd like to do. so many people. It's absolutely astonishing to me to see so many people at 30 years old. And I said, well, what are you going to be when you grow up? Well, I haven't decided. And I could never understand that, because I knew where I was going to go or what I was going to do from the beginning of life on. And there's a lot of detours. And when a detour comes along, oh boy, do I get them. I get them bridge washed out, no left turn, one way only. A lot of detours. And when they come about, well, then you dance around them. You just go around the detour and you go right back. It's like getting a map out and say, well, I'm going to leave New York and I'm going to go to California. You say, well, okay, I'll go to San Diego. If you want to get to San Diego, you'll get somewhere in Indiana and you'll find out that the bridge is washed out and it'll say detour, and you go, now you can either go make a new road or you can go on the detour and continue right on to San Diego. And that's what I do. I just say there's going to be a lot of detours, a lot of obstacles, and then you, when it happens, while you approach it, you work around it, and then you go right back to doing it. And so this is what I do. I just love to prepare to do the things that I've been wanting. I'm working on a couple of inventions of mine I've been working on for at least 60 years. And there's 2 or 3 things missing that I haven't figured out yet. And so I'll go to the library. They'll say, well, there he goes. And I'll go to the library and I'm reading, I'm studying, I'm asking questions. I got friends of mine helping me, and constantly trying to solve some of the problems. And sooner or later, you will find them.
Right. Les, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the log.
Well, when I was a kid starting out way back at the beginning, I got my harmonica and guitar, and I was ready to head for the big time. And I got a job on Saturday night playing at a barbecue stand, halfway between Waukesha and Milwaukee. And I rigged up the telephone on the end of a broomstick, chucked the broomstick, the broom bristle part, down into a cinder block. That was my mic stand and my mic. And I had the battery chargers on it, and I'm singing through my mother's radio. And people would drive up in their cars and get a hamburger and a root beer or whatever. And this one fellow was in the rumble seat of the car. And I wished I had his note, and I wished I knew who he was. And this is way back in the 20s. And he says, Red, he wrote a note to the car hop, and she handed it to me. He says, Red, he says, I can hear you loud and clear. Your harmonica is fine, your voice is fine, but he says, the guitar's not loud enough. And I thought, well, now, by George, what am I going to do about that? So I thought about getting another telephone and another radio and doing all of that. But I says, first thing I got to do is amplify the guitar. So I'm going to plug the guitar in the wall. Now, if you don't think I was a strange one in Waukesha, yeah, I had less friends and less friends. And what happened is that Finally, I said, to begin with, I got the guitar where I jabbed the phonograph pickup into the top of the guitar, and they could hear it. But it fed back. I'd turn it up and the volume, it would feed back and howl. So I chucked into the hole of the guitar some tablecloths, some napkins, socks, shorts, whatever. That didn't work. Then I filled it with plaster Paris. Finally, I tossed the guitar out completely as a bad idea. Finally, I made a decision to make two guitars. Well, I'm going to make two. One's going to be a piece of steel railroad track, and one of them's going to be a balsa wood. I'm going to make one with the softest material that will hold a string. And then I'm going to make one with the most rigid mass dense material that I could find, and that's a piece of railroad track. String a string on each one of them, and then take the other part of the telephone that you listen to on. There's a magnet and a coil in there, and I'd hook that up to the radio, and lo and behold, it worked. And hands down, the railroad track was the finest sounding string on a guitar, to simulate a guitar, that I'd ever heard. And when I went running to my mother and I told her I found it, it's a piece of railroad track. Mother says, the day you see Gene Autry on a horse with a piece of railroad track. And I was blown out of the water with that one. And so, well, it isn't going to be the balsa wood, because no, it has to have some weight to it. It's got to sustain the sound. And so I proceeded to make guitar after guitar after guitar. And one day, in 1941, I decided that I would go to the Epiphone factory. I was here in New York. I'd flipped a coin, left Chicago, came to New York to go to the big time. And when we got to New York, this is when I went down to the Epiphone factory and said, I would like to use your facilities on Sundays to make an experimental guitar. And they said, if we can watch or see what you're doing, we'd love to have you do it. And so the night watchman, he helped me turn on the switches and told me where all the stuff was. And I built my guitar, which I call a log. It was a 4x4. And with this log, I could string up my strings, and I could go out and prove for once and for all that it's not a railroad track, but it's a piece of wood. And with this piece of wood, that's all you needed, was two pickups in it, and one pickup at that time. And plug it into the wall, and you got yourself an electric guitar, and the rest would be history. Mm-hmm. Well, there's one fault about that thing. I took this log, this 4x4, and I went to a little tavern in Queens. And when I played the guitar that night, there was hardly no reaction. And so I thought, well, I guess I was wrong. And I got thinking about it, and I said, well, you know, a 4x4 don't really look like a guitar. So I go back to the factory and I made two sides and put them on so that when you clamp the sides on, you now have a guitar. It looks like a guitar. I went back to the same club a couple of Saturdays later, and I played for them, and to my amazement, they went crazy over that guitar. And the reason being that many people see with their eyes, they hear with their eyes. Yeah. Yeah. So that's how that the log came about. And of course, from that time on, it's been very good to me. The Les Paul guitar, yeah, it's something I never dreamt of, but I guess it was one of the things with the wiener and the dog. It was one of those things, someday I'll make a guitar that's right. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but I keep trying.
All right, so let's talk about the log. What do we know?
Wow.
What do we want to know?
That log, just about a month after this interview was conducted in his New Jersey home, was sent to the Country Music Hall of Fame in Nashville, Tennessee. So I like to think I was one of the last people to hold it and touch it before it went into their archives. And I have to say, I was sort of awestruck. First of all, when I set up the camera for the interview, his son Russ was there and showed me into the studio where Les's huge collection of amplifiers and microphones, the first microphone he built, the first ones that he used in his radio days. He had a huge collection of items, and they were all there. And so I was left alone. He went up to get his dad, and I set up the lights. And I just sort of looked around after everything was set up. I made sure I had my hands behind my back, so in case they came down, they didn't think I was actually going to touch anything. But boy, was I enamored with being there and seeing all this great gear. But I had no idea what was in this one particular case. It was an odd-shaped case until the interview, and he said, well, do you want to see the log? And I said, yes. And he picked it up and he handed it to me. So I got to hold the log and look at it. And, of course, it has the spoon from his mother's kitchen and that big piece of railroad tie that he doesn't like to call a railroad tie, but everybody refers to it that way. And it's a piece of history without question. And that inspiration, of course, of building his own guitar led to the series of Les Paul guitars made by the Gibson Company that don't exactly look like the log, but are based on the concept of this big piece of wood as opposed to the hollow acoustic guitar resonating the electric pulses and, of course, the pickup and so on. And so that was a really interesting opportunity that I won't soon forget. And this might be a good opportunity just to say that this interview and the previous one that I conducted with Les had a lot to do with his son, Russ, who was also his manager. He was a guy always at every gig that Les did. He was the sound guy. He recorded all the performances and made copies for people. As you probably well know, when Les performed every Tuesday night in New York City for many, many, many years, other artists were invited to go up on stage so that they can have the almighty claim of playing with Les Paul. Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick, who Elizabeth and I recently interviewed, was among the many musicians that have photographs taken of those performances, and those photographs often were taken by Les's son, Russ, who became very instrumental in the collaboration of the Les Paul Award and the Tech organization that, of course, is now at the NAMM show. And I remember the first time that the Les Paul Award was given out during a NAMM show. Russ was on hand, and it was a really special moment because I know that Russ cared very much about his father's legacy and was very proud of the fact that it continued. Of course, Les was around for the first many ceremonies of the Tech Award and handed out the Les Paul Award personally to many people. But after his passing, his son took over until his passing. And I like to think that the folks here at NAMM continue with that tradition very proudly.
What I heard from all of that, Mike, is that Dan's got to take us on a field trip to see it because he's got some sort of connection he's got to work. Right?
That's what I heard.
So come July when we're out in Nashville for the Summer NAMM show, I expect a field trip. Lunch included, I hope.
Always lunch included.
As long as you'll allow me to give you a tour of that museum. That place is awesome.
I don't think I can be gone from home for 6 to 7 years, so
no, that would be my
possible.
Graceland tour.
Insightful but lengthy, I think is how they describe it on the banner. So the other part that I wanted to touch on from that last segment with Les was he kind of says it at the end, the concept of hearing with your eyes, and I loved that line. And the reference is that when he takes out the first log and plays it for an audience, they don't respond very well, and then he gets told, that it needs to look like a guitar essentially, and not as it does. And so he goes home and kind of redesigns it and realizes that there is a visual component to music and to hearing. And I find that absolutely fascinating because I don't think that's something that many people key in on very frequently, but it's true.
Yeah, well, I think the design that goes into instruments is definitely a big factor as to why they're successful. Because you definitely want to be playing something that sounds amazing and that has great tonal qualities, but at the same time, you want it to look good on stage if that's what you're going to be doing with it. If it's just for studio work, it's a whole nother thing, but for performance, I think the looks of the instruments definitely play a big role. And the same thing goes for performing in general. Stage presence, that's a huge
costume design, whatever
exactly,
else you want
yeah.
to put into it.
Yeah, that's a huge part of performing.
Well, I think especially nowadays, I mean, who doesn't go to a major concert now and expect a show? I mean, it's not, you don't just sit there and close your eyes and listen to the music. Like, you expect it's theatrical to a large degree. So
I also have a favorite line that Les Paul, to segue back to that, Les called me here at the NAMM offices after this interview was done several years as I was looking for another engineer, and he helped me find him. And we were just chatting on the phone, and he says, the older I get, the fewer notes I play. And I thought that was a fantastic line, and that's one that will always stay with me. So now it's Michael's turn to come up with his favorite line from Les Paul. So
I personally like the part about the dog and the fishing rod.
I mean, it's a good life lesson, though, right? I mean, he circles back around on it constantly about really setting a goal for yourself and then but setting realistic goals. I mean, that's really the moral of that, right?
Right, yeah.
You got to be able to get that hot dog.
Yeah, just the fact that he actually did that is
comical,
yes,
to say the least. So fly on the wall for that. So we have more to wrap up the oral history interview, right? With Les Paul, just a small segment.
Yes, we do. So let's go back to that.
The Gibson people came to me and said, Les, we want you to design the guitar that you would like to, that you can dream as to being the great guitar of the future. You go ahead and I've been thinking about it. So, oh my goodness, the things that I have in my mind for the guitar tomorrow. And some of them are pretty scary. In fact, everything is kind of scary today because of what's going on. Everything is moving so fast, and it just doesn't. It scares you even to go down and buy something because the very camera I'm talking into now is out of date. The date they thought about it. That's only a year ago.
Very good point. I'm curious, when you started that design that Gibson challenged you to create, what were some of the things that you visioned for that guitar of the future?
Okay. When I finished building that guitar, the Epiphone people didn't think very much of it. And so I decided I would take it to the place that it should be anyway with Gibson. That's the largest manufacturer, the most famous of all guitars in the world was a Gibson guitar. That's the absolute ultimate. I took it to Gibson and they laughed at me. And then many years later, the chairman of the board said to me, he says, Les, I've got to tell you something. He says, he could tell me this now because we're very successful with the guitars and they're selling like mad. And he says, you know, that when you came to us 15 years ago with that idea, with that guitar, he says, we called you the character with the broomstick with the pickups on it. And he says, we kind of looked down upon your whole concept. And they were wrong, and I was right, but you never know. I sure got enough things around here that don't work. and it was last night, I think I said, you know, that's one of the most stupid things I ever did. And that's only 2 days ago. So I'm constantly doing things, learning. And I don't know. There's always a surprise around the corner. And I guess those are all interesting, that we have those. I guess if a person never got sick, it would be terrible. He'd only get sick once, he'd die. I think you have to get sick every once in a while, and I think that you have to. Everything goes right. No. It's kind of balances out. You have a good day and a bad day. If the sun shines every day, that's not right either. It's not going to make any difference. It's going to snow here pretty soon.
Les, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit. In our museum, we have a video clip from the Colgate Comedy Hour starring Abbott and Costello with you and your lovely wife at the time, Mary Ford. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about Mary Ford, for a guy who never was lucky enough to meet her, and also what that era in your life means to you now.
Well, there was many very interesting highlights in my career, and the biggest one by far was the one where I came out of NBC in Hollywood with a chore. The program director says, you got 9 shows you can do anything with, 9 15-minute shows. I already had 9 playing jazz, and they wanted me to do 9 shows of something different. And so I got out on the street at NBC, Sunset and Vine, and in about 2 seconds I see Gene Autry going by, so I holler, hey, Gene. And he says, hey, Rhubarb, how you doing? I was called Rhubarb Red many years prior to that. And so Gene Autry says, what's happening? I says, well, I was just thinking I'm looking for a girl singer. And I saw a country singer. And he says, well, the only one I know of is one that sings on my show, and she's with a trio. And he says, she's good. So I went over and I went with Gene, went over to CBS, and I listened at the rehearsal. And Gene gave me her phone number, and I called her. Her name was Colleen Summers, and I said, Colleen, I'm looking for a girl singer. My name is Les Paul. She says, yeah. And she didn't believe that it was Les Paul. And Les Paul happened to be her favorite guitar player. And so she was sure this was a hoax. It wasn't me. So finally I convinced her to come over to my home, and I forgot all about it. And so that Thursday or something, at 7 o'clock at night, she was to come over and record at my studios, and I was just building a studio. And that Thursday night, this gal comes over in the car. Now, I knew what she looked like because I'd seen her rehearsing with Gene Autry. She had never seen me. And so I was on the front lawn. It was dark, and I was picking up some beer cans and some old newspapers and mowing the lawn, which I do every year. And Mary thought I was the gardener. Any guy with a flashlight taped onto a lawnmower, not exactly what you'd call a kosher cat. So she just said, "Mister, can you tell me where Les Paul Studios are?" And I said, "Lady, you just go right down that driveway." And she went down that driveway, and there are the garages. But what we had done is built the studio and hadn't put a door in it yet. So they had to lift her through the window. And so finally, she's there, and she says, "Well, where's Les Paul?" And I says, "Oh, he'll be here in a minute." And finally, I walk in, and I could hear, I was in the control room, and she says, "Don't tell me that's Les Paul." "That's Les Paul." She says, "That's the gardener." No, that's Les Paul. So I heard the conversation, so I stepped through the window and picked up a guitar, and I played a run for her, and she said, "Well, here you are, Les Paul." Well, I know she was very disappointed. And that night, we went over and had some pizza in a nearby spot there, and we talked about what we were going to do on our radio show. We did this radio shows, 9 of them, a week. And I called her Mary Lou on the show. And we got along great right from the first second we met. She loved my sense of humor, and I hope my guitar playing. And I realized that Mary was a very special person, that she was a very talented person, and she, of all people, didn't realize how talented she was. She had no idea of her talent, and is frightened to death of stage, of being in the limelight, to be anywhere there's pressure. And she was just brought up in a family where she was anything but to be in show business. And here was this great talent. And it's a long story, but eventually, I was talking about that last night too. Someone asked me on the show how I found Mary to sing with me, and it was strictly by accident. I had Mary and I were in New York. I was playing the Paramount with the Andrews sisters. And I said, "You know what?" I said, "Rosemary Clooney, that's going to be my gal." I said, "She can sing with my trio, and it would be great." And Rosie was, boy, she was gung-ho to go do it with us. But there was a problem. I didn't know what to do with Rosie when she wasn't singing. And I may talk for hours and play for hours, and hear this gal sitting there in a chair with a tambourine waiting to sing, of course, because if the singer has nothing to do, they'll just sit there with their hands. Usually you hand them a tambourine. So we didn't know what to do. And I finally says, "No, Mary," I said, "I'm not going to get Rosie. I'm not going to go that way." And she says, "What about Doris Day?" "Oh," I says, "Doris Day." So I made a deal with Doris Day. And Doris Day was going to leave the orchestra and go with me, with my group. I says, Mary, I don't think that's going to work. I says, I could see her with her damn laundry hanging out of my station wagon. I'm flying down the road going to play Milwaukee or something. And I says, here she is with that tambourine sitting in that chair. And every singer I could think of would have a tambourine sitting in a chair. And just for spite, I probably wouldn't have them sing all night. So it just wasn't a good idea to have a person that couldn't play. And finally, one night, I find that Mary does play the guitar, and I taught her to play, and in no time at all, she learned what had to be done. And Mary and I hit it off real great, and of course, the rest was history. And there was that one particular show that I'm asked to talk about here, and that is the Colgate Comedy Hour. And it was Mary and I, and we were playing in Las Vegas. We had to go down to L.A. and do a TV show. And in doing the TV show, there was a part in the show where I play it's a comedy bit. I do a fast run, and then Mary copies me and makes me look bad. And so I go around, Ma, and I throw my arm out like this. Well, I happen to break this finger on the show. And so I said, oh, man, I said to Mary, I whispered it to her, she says, what happened? I said, I broke my finger. And what happened is that when I got back to Las Vegas, after the show, I had to play that and Tiger Rag, if you can believe that, with one finger broken. It just shows you what it can happen if you got a lot of people applauding and what you can do if you have to do it, right? You go out there, oh boy, a ham you must be. And we finished the show and everything. I went to the doctor in Las Vegas, and he says, not only did you break your finger, but you have arthritis. This was 1961. And that was the first time that I ever knew about arthritis or anything. But that was the beginning of it. But that was our little show with Abbott and Costello.
And you played Vaya con Dios.
I guess. I don't remember what I played. I remember playing Home Sweet Home. That's the number of the little comedy bit. And I remember, and along with a broken finger, I break a string. And it's on the most difficult number to play, which was Tiger Rag. And it's just full of notes. You got to play a lot of notes. And everybody thought I broke the string on purpose, that it was part of show business. It wasn't. It was an accident.
So that concludes our oral history interview with Les Paul. Again, that was recorded back in November of 2001 with Dan. But now we get to play his earlier work, Dan's earlier work, and that's from radio. So just be aware that the audio content's going to be a little bit different because it's an older quality, different production styles, things like that. So it's going to sound a little bit different.
Dan, do we know what year this is from?
Yeah, I wrote it down when you told me earlier.
It was September
15th, 1994.
So this goes back a ways, and I was very happy to have an opportunity, thanks to a couple of radio stations in the San Francisco Bay Area, to record some legends of music for a little broadcast that I had. It all started when my voice was changing and I didn't want my own voice on radio, and it led to a fascinating career for which I'm very blessed every day to talk with many of my heroes and make a friend every single week, which, if you know my personality, is absolutely perfect. Dream job. And this was really sort of a special moment for me because I had played phone tag in 1994. That was very expensive to do. The phone bill was running up, and I think I had 3 or 4 months of pretty heavy phone bills back to New York and New Jersey amongst management and finally Les's son before I finally landed this opportunity to talk to Les on the phone. So here is that interview.
It's an oldie, but a goodie.
Hello?
Hello, Mr. Paul.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Dan Del Fiorentino.
Hey, how you doing out there?
I'm doing wonderful. How about you?
Doing fine.
Well, thank you very much for taking some time. Is this a good time to talk?
Sure.
Wonderful. Thanks to your good friend Mr. Stern, we were able to hook up with you.
With who?
Howard Stern.
Oh, Harold Stern.
Yeah, sure. I guess is he your manager?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Don't get him mixed up with a disc jockey. Harold is another fellow.
I wouldn't do that.
No, I hope you don't. Okay.
So, I'm not sure if he mentioned to you, but KCE is a nonprofit radio station, and we've been playing big band music for about 15 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And you are one of the most requested performers we have.
No kidding.
Especially that recording of, let me make sure I get my notes right here, Lover.
Oh, that was the first one I released, yeah. That was the first one I made in multi-track for Capitol Records. It was the first one that we released, not the first one I made.
Right.
But it's the first one released, so it kind of came out in chronological order. So that was the first one in the 4-box set that you probably have, that CD.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, Lover.
That's a beautiful collection.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Did you, when that record came out, or as you were recording it, was it exactly what you wanted to accomplish?
Well, it was one of the very first experiments in that world where you do sped up things and where you're using the echo and you're playing all the different parts. Like the drums, I put those on separately. That's probably the only one that I used in all the multi-career of Mary and I and before Mary that I ever used a drum. I just took and recorded it, and this is all on disc before tape. And so when I made it, I put it on a turntable. So the drums, you just, I recorded them separately, put them on one disc, and then I played my guitar along with it.
Oh, okay.
And so that's how the drums got on there. And then the bass part, okay, I pulled a bass player in for that first record, and that's the only one that I have that has a real bass on it. All the rest of the recordings from the first record on are all with my guitar. I use that as my bass.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So on all the records, everybody believes or thinks that when they hear them, they're hearing a bass, but they're all done on one guitar.
I'm wondering if you could help maybe some of our listeners who aren't as musically or recording oriented, what exactly an overdubbing is.
Well, what it is where you play a part. You play a part, you record it. And then what you do is you play along with that part, a second part, and you record the two of them together. And now you have, it's like you take a picture of yourself, and then you stand alongside of the picture, and you take the two of you. One is a picture, and one is yourself live. If you do that, you're going to see two of the same person. Now, if you take the photograph of the two of them, and then you stand in the picture with the two of them, you'll now have three of them. And you keep doing that, and the problems are, of course, they're very critical, because by the time you go 37 times down in generations, why you have to have very fine equipment to do it and really know what you're doing, because 37 dubs down in the first generation, you don't know if it's man or mouse. The deterioration, the generations down, really plays havoc. But we could manage to do very well by going down that many times. But the trick there was we did them backwards. And in doing them backwards, we put the first person or the first recording. I'm doing a comparison here for the listener. But if you take the first part and put him down, and you put a part down there that is going to be buried anyway, it's going to be in the background, you won't notice that it's distorted or that it's changed from its original picture, and some quality is lost or whatever, which is you're unable to record 37 times down without a loss.
Right.
And so the trick is to play maybe the fifth part first, and the most important parts go on last. And so if, let's say How High the Moon, you're going to do 24 parts, and there's 12 of Mary and there's 12 of me on there. As when we make the recording, what I would do is I would have Mary sing the fifth part first.
Oh, I see.
And so when you end up with the last thing to go on would be the first part, because he's the one that's going to be predominantly out in front. And you want him nice and clear, and you want to hear everything with the least generations or distortion, so forth and so on. And that's the way it's done. Now, no one else did that, but that's the way we did it in the pioneering days. And prior to Mary, of course, it did the same thing, like on Lover. You do the same thing. You do it, start with the last and end up with the first. And oddly enough, the most important part that you put on there is the bass, and the bass part. So you put the bass part on last, because you never know how loud to make the bass. Everything else can go on there, and he's the one that creates the most distortion problems, because he's modulating the groove the widest. He has the most energy down at that low frequencies.
That is amazing.
Oh, it is. It's a trick and a half to do, and a trip and a half, and it's a lot of fun. And it's tedious. I locked myself in that little garage out in L.A. for about 2 years. Crosby called me and say, "What's happened to you?" You know, he figured I'd freaked out or something. And I told him, no, I was pursuing a new sound, and I was very excited about it. And they'd have to pry me out of my little garage studio, to get me to go down and record something with them, or to do a radio show. And I just kept pursuing that idea. And when I did get it, I remember playing several of the multi-track things first for Decca, because that's who I was with. Mm-hmm. And Dave Kapp listened to it outside of the garage. That was in Hollywood. And he says, well, once around the block, it's just a novelty. And multi-track will never last. So I said, I don't think I'm the guy. You're not the guy I'm looking for. So I went elsewhere. And it's a long story, but I happened to be at NBC selling this thing, and it was almost completely, the contracts were drawn up and everything to go with RCA. And because of an error back in Camden, New Jersey, I got a wire saying that they had a problem with the union, so forth and so on, and they delayed it. So I took my records and walked out, and I remember saying howdy to Gene Autry walking down the street there, and a couple other friends of mine. It was at Sunset and Vine.
So before we get into talking about Lover and multi-track releases and everything, while that clip was playing, Dan brought up a really good point, and that was, how old were Mike and I when that 1994 interview was conducted?
So September of 94, I would have been 9 months old.
Ooh, I would have been 7. So...
Yikes. I'm feeling a little old at the moment. But you were alive. Mike, thanks for bringing that point up. I feel at least a little bit better knowing that you were alive at the time.
Alive and destined to be sitting here around this table.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this very moment back then.
Brainstorming right there about editing and post-production and everything. So, in that clip, Les does go over multi-track recording a little bit, but for those of us who are extremely unfamiliar with that concept, I think we're going to turn it over to Mike to explain it.
Yeah, so basically, multi-track recording is the ability to record multiple sources onto separate tracks. And before multi-track recording, all of the musicians would have to be in the room. They'd all be recorded to the same track, and it was you had to play your part correctly. And if anything went wrong, if someone messed up, or if the engineer recording messed something up, you would have to do the whole thing over again.
And that, sorry to interrupt, but that was like the concept we talked about in the last couple episodes when we went over Sun, right? They were all in one room together. Yeah,
they were in one room. They had 4 mics, and everybody would just play together like you would see a band live. But with multi-track recording, not only does it enable you to go in and re-record individual parts or fix just, one part of a song, it allows you to do a lot more, such as add effects to individual instruments, or even to record whole songs with just one person or one instrument. I know Les was talking about recording an orchestra of guitars, and now that was possible with multi-track recording, which is pretty crazy, because it opened the door for possibilities that no one was thinking of before. You never really thought to record the basic song and then, okay, let's listen to it and see what we can add to it. Let's play something backwards over it. That was never possible. Certain effects like phasing was never really possible before multi-track recording. The only downside to doing this is the more you layer onto a track, the more the track would degrade, and that first original recording that you have will keep getting less and less substantial. It would wither away, and the other downside too would be that first original recording. If you record something else over it, then you're essentially getting rid of that original recording. And what Les used to do to get around this is he would record his original onto one recorder, and then he would record the second part onto another recorder, making it so that the mixed version, so both parts together, would be on one machine, and then the first original take would be on that first machine.
That way you're always preserving the original.
Exactly.
Okay.
Nowadays with computers, you don't have to do that. It's a lot easier. You just press a button and everything seems to work.
So the other concept that Les went over was overdubbing.
Yeah, so overdubbing is basically just when you take the original recording, and if you want to layer in some more parts over it, or if you wanted, say, a second guitar part to harmonize with the first guitar part, or anything like that, you would just record over that original track to make it sound like more than what just was happening.
What's really interesting to me about this is that Les created this for tools for himself in his own playing. And at one point, he made the comment that he was really blown away when other artists were using it to their benefit. And I remember one of those first aha moments for Les that he told me was when he heard Buddy Holly and some of the electronics that he was utilizing, overdubbing in particular, and how Les was flabbergasted by the fact that other artists could use this to such great success when really his idea behind it was just to improve his own playing and his own production. So the fact that other people started using it really was kind of a surprise to him.
Yeah, I mean, it was so useful for so many different things. I mean, we're utilizing multi-track recording right now. This podcast is being recorded to 3 separate tracks. There you go.
All right, we're going to listen to the last part of Dan's radio interview with Les Paul. And just a reminder, if you want to check out any of our oral history content uninterrupted, you don't have to hear our commentary, make sure you go on to our website, which is www.nam.org. That's NAMM.org, to check out the videos and many more that we haven't quite talked about just yet.
We stepped out of NBC, and across the street, they were putting up a canvas sign that said Capitol Records. And I walked over there, and in no time flat, Jim Conklin says, "Boy, how many of these you got?" I says, "I got 22. He said, "You got a deal." He was terribly excited about it, and I'm forever grateful to Jim Conklin for believing in it.
That's amazing.
He was married. Jim Conklin is married to one of the King sisters, and he was very privy to not only good music but creative new things, and so that's the man I was looking for.
Did you, Mr. Paul?
You can call me Les.
Oh, well, thank you.
Okay.
Did you always consider yourself more of an engineer as opposed to a guitarist?
No. Whatever I was on, I tried to do my best on it and try to do it correctly and as well as I could. And so if I'm playing the guitar, I try to play it right and play it, well, right in my eyes at least, or I like to listen to what the people want, and so I try to please them. I had a fellow on the phone the other night say to me, he says, "I want to come down and sit in with you at Fat Tuesdays." And he says, it should be fun because I can play what I like and not what the people like. I don't have to do what they want. And I said, well, I think you'd be going to the wrong place, because I said, I don't play for myself. I play for the people. And that would be like, I'll never forget, I was in L.A. one time when I lived out there. I was dialing the radio, and in Modesta, I heard a disc jockey up there and on a tiny station, and he was taking phone calls and so forth and so on. And he says, if you don't like the music I'm playing, then dial somewhere else. But he says, I don't play what you want to hear. I play what I want to hear. And I've never forgotten that, because a disc jockey should play what the public wants.
Absolutely.
That's what you're doing, right?
Exactly.
Sure.
Does it surprise you, Les, that the public wants to hear your records?
No, I thought that always the people would appreciate or welcome something that was new, creative, different, a new sound, if it's done well. And, of course, I had my jury. I called them my jury, and they were different friends of mine that were of all different calibers. So one might be a technician, another one might be a musician, another one may be a housewife, another one may be a gaffer for Warner Brothers, another one electronic engineer. And all my friends that came over they didn't know it, but they were part of my jury. And when they all would pick Tiger Rag, or they all would, I never asked them what they thought of the song. When they came over the house, they'd say, would you put on Mac the Knife Again for me? Would you put on this song? Would you put on that song?
and then I would file this in my mind, and automatically I would say, you know, no matter out of all my jury, practically unanimously, they will ask for World's Waiting for the Sunrise, How High the Moon, and so I pretty well knew that as far as Joe Public is concerned, I had a wide scope to deal from, you know.
Did your personal likes and the things that you liked personally in terms of your recordings, did they pretty much match up with those that the public identified with?
Yes. Yeah, and that goes to the fact that I recognize from an early age on that the best thing that I can do is find out what the public wants. And I learned that from Fred Waring, the Andrews sisters, from working at the WLS Barn Dance, from working down in Nashville, from doing country music, playing with the jazz. Oh, there's one. When you play in jazz, it was a critical thing, because if you play for the public and you play commercial, that's a no-no. And so when I made jazz at the Philharmonic for Norman Granz with Illinois Jacquet and Nat Cole and all those great players, and we tore that first jazz at the Philharmonic, they were a riot out in that audience. They loved it so much. As history developed at that time, Norman Granz had a terrible time trying to sell jazz at the Philharmonic because it was commercial, what Nat and I did. And at first, the public accepted it greatly, but not the people buying, the jazz people. When Norman went to sell the thing, they says, well, that's a little commercial, you know, and commercial is not a word. That's a bad word in jazz. So you know, that's almost like if some guy playing the melody, you're not supposed to play it. And my belief is that when they wrote Over the Rainbow or Stardust or Can't Get Started, those are beautiful melodies. And that's what I'm sure you recognize with your listeners, that they enjoy hearing, is the melody.
Exactly.
And in a lot of the music today, you hear a lot of the players out there, and they just play loud, and they just play how fast they can play, but they're not playing the melody. And somehow you should not turn your back on the audience. I see it a lot at Fat Tuesdays because I talk to the owners of this club that I play in. I've been there 10.5 years. And it's amazing the people that they get in there and how some of them don't do well. And those that don't do well, the history, I've known them for a million years, and without mentioning their names, I know before they go in there that they're not going to do well because they're playing music that the public doesn't understand. Mm-hmm. And you have to realize in a nightclub that you don't just get hand-picked people that are graduates in jazz and know music and are trained people. He may be a mechanic working underneath a car. He may be an oil man. He may be a grocery man. Whatever he does, the people are of all different occupations, different thinking, come from a different place. When I look at Fat Tuesday, the audience, there's 190 in the audience, and there's 190. And there's some that won't beat their foot unless there's good rhythm going, or they're not pleased unless they hear some melody. Then there's another guy sitting there, and he's waiting for you to get very technical. That's why he's there. So I can kind of spot a musician that wants to hear this and a fellow from China or Singapore or from Germany. He wants something else. The way I look at it is that when you're playing with a group of people, you don't know really whether he's in town for 3 days and he asks the cab, where is it happening? Or what's a hot spot in town? And the cab driver says, well, go down to Fat Tuesday and hear Les Paul. He's down there. He does very well. Everybody seems to like him. So this guy says, Les who? He never heard of me. And plus the fact that he don't particularly like a guitar. Who knows? And he comes down there and he sits there and he says, well, I got to go somewhere. Another guy says it's raining out, so I think I'll just jump in here till it stops raining. That's the only reason he's there. And so they're down there for many others. It fascinates me that the four of them will get in a car in Chicago and drive with no sleep, come all the way to New York, sit down at Fat Tuesdays for both shows, get in the car, switch drivers, and go all the way back to Chicago with no sleep.
Wow.
And they do that twice a year. One of the high executives of Exxon flies in from Singapore. And when he comes in the door, I play his favorite song, and I recognize him when he walks in, and whatever I'm playing, I stop, play his song. He sits down, and he's very faithful. He's very grateful. And that goes for so many important people.
Do you have a favorite song that you like to perform?
No. No. Someone asked me that question too. Of all the songs that we recorded, do I have a favorite? I think every one of them I'm excited about at the time I'm making it. And if it's Via Candias, then that's the one I call capital. I say, hey, this is a hit for sure. This is a hit. And if it's How High the Moon, I have that same enthusiasm about it because it's at the time I'm pumped up with that one, And inventing the same way, I was as excited about the electric guitar or about the 8-track, multi-track machine or reverb, echo, whatever it was. At the time, that was the round wheel. So I was terribly excited about each one.
Does it surprise you at all, Les, that one of your original guitars is hanging up in a hard rock cafe?
Yeah, I gave it to him. I gave it to him, one for each place. Each hard rock that has them, they got from me. And I give them one of my guitars. And no, it doesn't surprise me because down at Fat Tuesdays, again, I'll see Dylan. I'll see George Benson. I will see everybody that you can name, the Johnny Smiths, whoever. And that goes for Illinois Jack Cat, whoever you wish to name that's around, they'll be in that audience. And so Tony Bennett, about a month ago, he comes in and says, Tony, you feel like singing? And he was right up on that stage and sunny side of the street. He just starts to sing. We find his key and we're gone.
Amazing.
And it's a kick. I love it.
I wish that was closer to us.
I went to California and I looked and I tried so hard to find a place that would do what they're doing down at Fat Tuesdays, and it just was, unfortunately, I looked in Santa Monica, I looked everywhere around the L.A. area to find a place, and I couldn't find it.
You were never successful, huh?
No, I didn't find this intimate spot that I was looking for, so I did the same thing in New York. I looked in New York, and finally I found it, and and when I went to the owner, to the manager, I said, my name is Les Paul, and he says, Les who? And I says, oh. And I says, well, I'd like to talk to you about playing down here. And he says, well, we're pretty well booked. And I knew I was getting nowhere. And so I says, who owns this place? And he says, that man right over there, sitting over there. So I went over and I introduced myself. His name is Milt. And Milt says to me, not the Les Paul. Uh-oh. I says, I think I struck something here. And he was real nice about it until I said, I would like to work every Monday. And he says, well, we're not open Mondays. And I says, well, would you open up on Mondays? And he says, well, I don't think we do any good. Monday's a dead night. And I says, well, I'll work for nothing. How's that? And he says, you got it. And I says, well, not exactly for nothing. We'll split it. If you do good, I do good, okay? And he says, you got a deal. And that was 10.5 years ago.
Wow.
And it's just been a pleasure. And the musicians with me feel just like I do, and the owners, that they just look forward to Monday night because it's so much fun. I never thought I'd stay more than a month anywhere without being bored. It is a lot of fun.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it is.
Well, you have an amazing career, and we sure hope that you'll continue to record. Is there any other recording dates in your future?
Yes, there is. Both on video and on record. I'm talking with the Sony people right now. I'm making a deal for some of the stuff coming out of Fat Tuesdays, and then also playing with some of the today's artists that are popular.
Oh, great!
And that kind of mixes the thing with the blues players and the rock players and myself, and we just want to be careful that we don't go too far, step off the curb one way or the other.
Right.
To kind of stay sane.
If that's possible.
Well, yeah. Fresno, I want to ask you a question. I had a very dear friend there. His name was Dutch Leonard.
Oh, okay.
And he was a great guy, and he used to bed us down there when we were in going through Fresno from wherever we were. And Dutch, I helped put the sound system in for him and make a deal with a lot of the record companies to get outtakes, because that's all he collected was outtakes.
Really?
Yeah. And he passed on, and it's a terribly interesting story. I'm writing it in my book about Dutch. I love the man, and you know, he was a baseball pitcher.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and so he went into the great business up there in Fresno, and did terribly well, and became very wealthy. But his love was to get outtakes, the ones that were not correct. And so the ones they were going to toss out anyway. So he just...
That's pretty good.
Oh, it was the greatest, because if Bing messed up on a song, that's the take he wanted.
And that's the one Bing wanted to get rid of anyway.
Decco's going to toss them out. So they'd say, put these aside for Dutch. And McGregor's transcription, boy, I'm telling you, and Decca, all of Capitol, everybody. Nat Cole, he had nothing but all the outtakes. And the conversation that went with it. Right. Some of it you can't play on the air yet.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of the Music History Project. If you have any episode suggestions or any comments, please feel free to email us at library@nam.org.
And thank you to Zach Phillips for the writing and recording of our theme song.